In a century-old winery nestled among the rolling hills of Napa Valley, an absurd proposal would forever change the life of a humble grape picker. A powerful man marked by illness and loneliness would offer her everything she didn't have in exchange for the unthinkable. But sometimes fate ferments its most precious wines in the very barrels where we least expect to find sweetness. The dawn in Calistoga always broke with the scent of damp earth and the song of birds among the vines. Joanna Garcia would wake before the sun touched the shingles of the small rented house on the outskirts of the tourist town, when the world still held the night's secrets in its folds of fog. Her 28 years carried the serenity of one who had learned early that life did not distribute its graces fairly, but it also did not steal the dignity of those who knew how to work with their own hands. Her fingers calloused and precise moved over her simple work uniform as if preparing armor. Faded jeans, a cotton t-shirt, a cap to shield her from the sun-thin fabric gloves. Each piece was a promise of survival. Each day of work, a small victory against the overdue electric bill, against the rent due at the end of the month, against the cost of Grandma Augusta's medicine, which was more than Joanna could earn in a full week of harvesting. Joanna glanced out the fogged window as she got ready, observing the still deserted streets of the neighborhood, where other farm workers, housekeepers, and cooks for the tourist restaurants also lived. From the back room, a confused voice broke the silence. "Mom, where are you?" Joanna dropped her backpack and walked barefoot across the cold floor. Grandma Augusta was sitting on the bed, her face as pale as the white sheets, her eyes glazed with a confusion that was becoming more and more frequent. At 78, Augusta seemed to have lost the thread connecting her to the present. The Alzheimer's consuming her had no cure, but it had a price. The medications cost more than Joanna could earn in 2 months of harvesting. "It's not your mom, Grandma. It's me, Joanna," Joanna whispered, adjusting the blanket over the shoulders of the woman who had raised her since she was 5 when a car accident took her parents on a rainy autumn afternoon. Augusta touched her granddaughter's face with trembling fingers, and in that gesture was all the love that her confused words could no longer express. For a few seconds, her eyes cleared as if the mental fog had lifted. "My girl," she murmured, "my little Jo." The morning followed its course of small rituals. Joanna prepared chamomile tea, cut slices of bread that needed to last until payday, helped Augusta take her pills, and left everything organized for her neighbor, Mrs. Davis, who came to look after the elderly woman during the day, in exchange for a symbolic amount that Joanna could barely afford. At 6 a.m., Joanna was at the bus stop. The charter bus that took the pickers to the Sterling estate arrived on time. Inside, sleepy voices exchanged good mornings. Some complained about the early morning chill, others already planned their lunch in the winery's cafeteria. Joanna sat in the back, as she always did, and looked out the window as the bus climbed the winding mountain roads. Her brown hair, tied in a simple braid, swayed with the bumps in the road. Sometimes she looked at the wineries they passed, properties with elegant signs, sophisticated restaurants and wine shops where a single bottle cost what she earned in a week. They were worlds that seemed as distant as stars. The Sterling estate appeared at the top of the hill, always impressing her. Even after 3 harvests working there, the main building of stone and wood, an architecture that mixed rustic with modern, surrounded by acres and acres of vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see, was a sight to behold. Century-old vines coexisted with recently planted areas, and there was an order, a harmony to the place that Joanna had always silently admired. The supervisor, Marcus, a middle-aged man with a sun-weathered face, distributed the teams. "Joanna, you're going to Section C, the old vines. Be careful with the clusters. The Merlot is at the perfect point." Joanna nodded and followed her group. She knew that section well. The vines were over 50 years old, with deep roots that produced grapes of exceptional quality. While the other pickers chatted, Joanna worked in concentrated silence. Her fingers touched each cluster with care, assessing firmness, ripeness, separating those with any issues before the supervisor even noticed. "How do you know which one is good and which isn't?" asked Tanya, a new picker working beside her. "My grandmother worked in vineyards her whole life," Joanna explained softly. "She taught me to see, to touch, to feel. Each cluster tells a story if you pay attention." Tanya looked at her with curiosity. "You talk so nicely. Did you go to college?" "I finished high school. I read a lot." Joanna smiled shyly. "Books from the public library are free." In the afternoon, when the golden light filtered through the vine leaves and transformed the vineyard into a green cathedral, Joanna continued her work. Her deep brown eyes had that special quality of someone who had learned to see beauty, even in simple things. Augusta, who had been a picker before Alzheimer's, had taught her not only about grapes, but about dignity in work, about how every fruit deserved respect. But as her hands gently picked the clusters, a dark thought crossed her mind, like a cloud over the sun. Augusta's medications were running out. In 2 weeks, maybe 3, there would be nothing left to control the growing confusion, the nighttime agitation that made her scream. And Joanna, no matter how hard her arms worked from sunup to sundown, no matter how many extra jobs she took, knew it wouldn't be enough. Life is an imperfect harvest, she thought, where the fruits are lost just when we need them to hold on the most. That night, Joanna wrote a few lines in the worn notebook she kept in her drawer. Augusta had once told her that writing was a way to keep the soul from rotting in silence. Joanna wrote about fear, about helplessness, about how hard it was to be strong when everything around her was collapsing like a house of cards. The night breeze brought the distant aroma of fermenting wineries. Joanna couldn't imagine that from that same direction, the winds that would change her destiny would also blow in ways she could never have foreseen. What she didn't know was that in less than a week, an impossible proposal would knock on her door and nothing would ever be the same again. Anthony Sterling walked alone through the stone corridors of his winery. It was almost 10 o'clock at night, and the silence of the estate had that heavy quality of places where laughter had forgotten how to sound. His footsteps echoed against the walls that had witnessed 4 generations of Sterling's men of broad shoulders and rigid principles who had built their wine empire with hard work and unwavering passion. At 44, Anthony carried the invisible weight of a life half-lived. His dark hair, generously sprinkled with gray, framed a face with lines marked by time and melancholy. He was tall, with broad shoulders that work in the vineyards kept strong. He always wore dark colors, as if mourning for his wife, who had died 6 years earlier, was a second skin he could not shed. Beatrice. The name still echoed in his mind like a distant bell. An arranged marriage between families, a union of wineries and surnames convenient for both sides. They had lived like polite strangers under the same roof, sharing meals and silences, but never truly sharing a life. When breast cancer took her, Anthony felt only emptiness filling another emptiness, as if nothing had really changed. No children. The words haunted him like a ghost. No heirs for these lands his great-grandparents had pioneered for this winery that held so many stories in its oak barrels. His distant cousin Raymond Sterling waited like a patient vulture. Everyone knew his reputation. A compulsive gambler, an irresponsible investor drowning in debts from cryptocurrency and online sports betting. Anthony stopped in front of his office window, looking out at the valley stretching under the silver moonlight. The Sterling estate was the largest and most awarded in the region. Its workers were treated fairly, paid above market wages, and had health insurance. All of that would disappear when Raymond took over. The man would sell everything in months to pay off gambling debts, but there was something more urgent haunting him. 5 weeks ago, Dr. Blake, a renowned San Francisco oncologist, had confirmed what Anthony already suspected from the symptoms: advanced inoperable pancreatic cancer. 10 months to live, maybe a year, if the palliative chemotherapy worked. His skin was beginning to take on a subtle yellow tint. His hands trembled at the end of the day, and the fatigue was constant. It was then that the idea was born, terrible and practical at the same time. He needed an heir, but he didn't have time for traditional courtship for the years a conventional relationship would take. He needed someone who understood that this would be a transaction, but who also had the dignity and kindness necessary to raise a child with love. For weeks, he discreetly observed the women in the region. He didn't want someone from his own social class. They would come with expectations, complicated families, and demands he couldn't meet. He wanted someone who understood that this was different. And then he saw Joanna. It was in February, at the beginning of the harvest, when Anthony made one of his inspections of the vineyards. He always liked to personally oversee the harvest of the old vines, the ones his grandfather had planted. He observed not only the quality of the grapes, but also how the workers treated them. That's when he noticed a young picker working in the century-old Merlot section. She moved with a delicacy different from the others, touching each cluster as if evaluating something invisible. Anthony watched, fascinated, as she discreetly set aside 3 clusters with early signs of rot that the supervisor hadn't yet detected. "Who is that?" he asked Marcus. "Joanna Garcia. 3rd harvest with us, Mr. Sterling. Best picker we have. Never damages the grapes. She has an impressive clinical eye." Anthony continued to watch. He saw Joanna stop to explain something to a new picker, pointing to the leaves, the clusters teaching with patience. He also saw her pick up a technical viticulture magazine that some agronomist had left behind in a corner of the vineyard. While the others rested and chatted, Joanna leafed through the pages with genuine interest. In the following days, Anthony made discreet inquiries. He learned about the grandmother with Alzheimer's, the financial difficulties, Joanna's unwavering honesty. He learned that she would never accept charity, but she might accept a deal if it were presented with clarity and fairness. He also learned that she read that she was intelligent, that she had that rare combination of practical knowledge and the ability to learn. A picker who studied viticulture on her own. Rare. Precious. Anthony returned to his mahogany desk, took a piece of letterhead with the winery's logo, and wrote the letter with a firm hand, despite the tremor that was already beginning to settle in his fingers. There was no time for doubt. Death was riding in, and he needed to leave a legacy that wasn't the destruction of everything his family had built. He sealed the letter and called Martha, his trusted assistant. "Take this to the address of a Miss Joanna Garcia and wait for a reply." As the car descended the winding road, Anthony looked out at the valley again. He knew that what he was about to propose was extraordinary, perhaps cruel in its brutal honesty. But he also knew that sometimes life demanded practicality, even when the heart wished only for romance. And so, under the cold March moonlight, a letter crossed the distance between 2 worlds that should never have touched, but that fate insisted on intertwining. The letter arrived one afternoon when the heat still lingered over the town. Joanna heard the doorbell and was surprised. Almost no one ever came to her door except Mrs. Davis from next door. The elegant woman at the door wore discreet but clearly expensive clothes. "Miss Joanna Garcia." "Yes." "I'm Martha Oliveira, Mr. Anthony Sterling's assistant. He asked me to deliver this personally." She held out a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Sterling Estate logo in gold relief. Joanna held the object as if it were something too fragile. "Is there a problem? Did I do something wrong at work?" "No, not at all. Mr. Sterling requests a response by noon tomorrow. If you accept the invitation, we can pick you up at 2 p.m. When the car was gone, Joanna sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the envelope. The letter was typed formal, but the words were chosen with care. "Miss Joanna Garcia, I respectfully request your presence at the Sterling Estate tomorrow at 2 p.m. for a conversation of a private and urgent nature. I understand this invitation may seem unusual, but I assure you it is a serious matter and will be in your interest. A car will be at your disposal at the indicated address. Sincerely, Anthony Sterling." Nothing more. No clue as to what it could be about. Augusta, sitting in the armchair by the window, watched her granddaughter with eyes that were still sharp in moments of lucidity. "What does the master of the winery want with you, child?" "I don't know, Grandma, but I'm going to find out." The night that followed was long. Joanna tossed and turned in bed, trying to imagine what could be so urgent. Maybe he wanted to promote her to supervisor, or maybe there was a problem she hadn't noticed. But something in the formal tone of the letter suggested it was more than that. The next day, Joanna wore her best clothes. Dark jeans without tears, a simple but well-ironed white blouse and leather sandals she saved for special occasions. She combed her hair carefully, pulling it into a bun that Augusta had taught her to make years ago. When she looked in the small bathroom mirror, she saw what she always saw, an ordinary young woman, with a delicate but not strikingly beautiful face and eyes that held more thoughts than they let on. The car arrived promptly at 1:30. It was a black sedan, discreet but clearly expensive. The driver, a polite middle-aged man, opened the door for her. Joanna had never been in a car like this with leather seats and silent air conditioning. The trip to the winery took 20 minutes. Joanna watched the landscape she knew from the bus, but it looked different from this angle. When they arrived, they didn't go to the work sheds but to the main house. Martha greeted her at the entrance. "Miss Garcia, Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in his office. This way, please." The hallways smelled of oak wood and aged wine. Old paintings showed generations of Sterlings next to their vines. Joanna followed Martha her soft steps on the wooden floor. When they reached a frosted glass door with bronze details, Martha knocked lightly and opened it. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Garcia has arrived." Anthony Sterling was standing by the panoramic window overlooking the vineyards. When he turned, Joanna could see clearly what she had only sensed during his inspections. He was sick. His skin had a subtle yellowish tint. His sunken eyes showed deep fatigue, and there was an almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. "Miss Garcia, thank you for coming," he said, his voice deep but gentle. He indicated a modern design chair. "Please sit. What I'm about to say will require you to be comfortable." Joanna sat, her hands clasped in her lap, her heart beating like a trapped bird. Anthony sat behind the minimalist desk, studying her for a moment, with those gray eyes that seemed to weigh souls. "I'll be direct, as time doesn't allow for pleasantries," he began. "I am dying. Inoperable pancreatic cancer. I have 8 to 10 months to live according to my doctors, and I have no heirs." Joanna felt the air leave her lungs, but remained motionless, just listening. "My cousin Raymond will inherit everything when I die. He is an irresponsible, indebted man who will destroy in months what my family built in 4 generations. The workers of this winery, the families who depend on these lands, everyone will suffer." Anthony paused, the next words clearly difficult. "Therefore, I have come to make you a proposal that I perfectly understand will sound absurd and possibly offensive." The silence in the room was so dense that Joanna could hear the ticking of the wall clock. "I would like you to marry me. I would like you to give me a child, a legitimate heir, who can inherit these lands and protect them. In return, I guarantee you lifelong financial security, a dignified home, and complete medical care for your grandmother Augusta, including the best Alzheimer's specialists in the country." He looked directly into her eyes. "I know this is not a marriage in the traditional sense. It will be an honest agreement, transactional in nature, but it will be legal registered and will protect you and the child forever. You will have full autonomy, professional training if you wish, and you will never want for anything." Joanna felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. Her mind spun, trying to process words that seemed to come from a fever dream marriage-child agreement. The words danced in her head, without finding a place to land. "Why me?" she managed to ask, her voice just a whisper. "I observed many women over the past few weeks. I was looking for someone with genuine kindness, honesty, and a capacity for hard work. Someone who could raise a child with true love, not with the coldness of social obligations." He leaned forward slightly. "And then I saw you working. I saw how you treat the vines with respect, how you teach the other pickers, how you study viticulture on your own. I saw that you are intelligent, that you can learn, that you could one day manage these lands when the child is still too young." A child. He already assumed there would be a child. I need to think," Joanna managed to articulate, feeling as if she were drowning in air. "I understand perfectly. Take all the time you need." Anthony picked up an envelope from the desk. "Here are the detailed terms in writing reviewed by lawyers. Take it, show it to your grandmother if you wish, but I ask that you give me an answer within a week. Time, unfortunately, is a luxury I do not have," said Joanna. Took the envelope, her hands now visibly trembling. She stood up, feeling her legs were unsteady, and walked toward the door. "Miss Garcia!" Anthony's voice stopped her before she left. She turned. His eyes held something she didn't expect to see. A deep sadness, almost like an apology. "I know this isn't fair, but life rarely is, and I'm trying to do the best I can with the little I have left." Joanna nodded slightly and left, walking through the now seemingly endless hallways. It was only when she was back in the car, descending the winding road, that she allowed the tears to come. An impossible proposal, a loveless marriage, a child conceived as a solution to a business problem. And she, Joanna, a humble picker who could barely afford her grandmother's medicine, now held in her hands the paper that could change everything or destroy her soul in ways money could never repair. Joanna didn't immediately tell Augusta about the proposal. How could she? How could she explain that one of the most respected men in Napa Valley had just offered her marriage not for love, but as a cold transaction to produce an heir? For the next 4 days, Joanna lived in a state of silent agony. She continued with her tasks, went to the harvest, picked grapes, prepared meals, cared for Augusta, but her mind was a constant whirlwind of violently contradicting thoughts. This is absurd, degrading. He wants to use me as a surrogate, she thought, as she picked Cabernet Sauvignon under the scorching sun. But then she would look at Augusta more confused each day, each episode of disorientation more frightening, and think, but this could save her. The medicine's real specialists, a life without the power being cut off every month. At night, lying in her bed, Joanna stared at the cracked ceiling and let the tears flow silently. She thought of her dignity, of what her parents would say if they could see her considering such a proposal. But she also thought of how many times Augusta had given up everything to raise her, to teach her to give her love, when the world had only offered her orphanhood. It's humiliating, but so is hunger. So is watching my grandmother scream at night without being able to afford a neurologist. Joanna opened the envelope Anthony had given her and read the documents for the third time. The legal language was complex, but the essentials were clear. A marriage contract and property agreement, an immediate civil marriage with complete separation of assets. Joanna would receive a monthly amount equivalent to 20 times the minimum wage for personal expenses, a fully furnished house on the property with total privacy, premium health insurance for her and Augusta, including treatment at specialized clinics. After the birth of the heir, Joanna would have lifelong financial autonomy with a guaranteed monthly income. The child would be educated with every privilege, and Joanna would have decision-making power over their upbringing. In the event of Anthony's death before the birth, all terms would remain valid. Joanna could take any college or vocational course she wished fully funded. There were no promises of love, no false romanticism, just a deal between two people desperate for different reasons. On the fourth day, Augusta had a violent crisis. Joanna was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard a sharp scream. She ran and found her grandmother in the bathroom, fallen on the floor, trembling. Augusta's face was livid, her eyes wide with terror, not recognizing where she was. "Get out of here! Who are you? Get out of my house!" the elderly woman screamed, trying to drag herself away from Joanna. "Grandma, it's me! It's Joanna!" Joanna cried, trying to calm her, but Augusta pushed her with surprising strength, scratching her arm. "Thief! Thief! In my house!" It took Joanna 20 minutes to calm Augusta, to hold her firmly but gently whispering lullabies, until the confusion passed, and the exhausted grandmother collapsed into a childlike sob in her granddaughter's arms. It was in that moment, with Augusta crying like a frightened child, with blood trickling from the scratches on her arm, with the fear of real, progressive madness before her, that Joanna made her decision. There was no luxury of dignity when the life of someone you love was at stake. There was no room for pride when the alternative was to watch Augusta lose herself completely, while she, Joanna, held in her hands the possibility of giving her comfort and care in her final years. When Augusta finally fell asleep, when the crisis passed, and she rested with gentle breathing, Joanna went out to the small porch. She sat on the single step, looking at the city lights in the distance, at the stars that shone indifferent to human suffering. She remembered something Augusta had told her years ago in one of her last moments of complete lucidity. Child life puts us before choices where there's no good option, only the least bad one. And there's no shame in choosing to survive as long as you keep your heart clean. Joanna picked up her phone and found the number Martha had left in the envelope. She sent a simple message. "I accept to talk again tomorrow if possible." The reply came in less than 5 minutes. "At 2 p.m., the car will pick you up. Martha." The next morning, Joanna wore the same dark jeans and white blouse. She combed her hair, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman she saw. She seemed to have aged years in just a few days. Mrs. Davis came to look after Augusta. "Are you all right, dear? You look tired," the neighbor commented with concern. "I'm fine, Mrs. Davis. Just hard work." The trip to the winery was silent. The respectful driver asked no questions. When they arrived, Martha was waiting. But this time there was something different in her demeanor. A kindness that hadn't been there at the first meeting. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the office, but first I'd like to show you something, if I may." Joanna nodded, curious. Martha led her down a different path around the main house until they reached a smaller building separated by a garden of hydrangeas. It was a two-story house, all wood and glass, with a wide porch and a view of the vineyards. "This would be your house," Martha explained. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a full kitchen living room, fully furnished and equipped. The ground floor bedroom has been adapted for your grandmother with an accessible bathroom and all necessary features. Martha opened the door. The interior was cozy, decorated with simple but elegant taste. Light wood, comfortable furniture, natural light pouring in through large windows. There were books on the shelves, a fireplace, a modern kitchen Joanna had never imagined having. "Mr. Sterling made sure to prepare everything himself," Martha continued. He's a good man, Miss Garcia. I know the proposal is unusual, but I can assure you he is honest and fair. I've worked for the family for 15 years. Joanna touched the kitchen counter, feeling the cold stone under her fingers. All of this could be hers. A real home, not a rented house with leaks. Security comfort, a future. "Shall we go to the office?" Martha asked gently. Anthony was waiting for her this time, seated looking even more tired than the week before. When Joanna entered, he stood up with effort. "Miss Garcia, thank you for returning." "I accept your proposal, Mr. Sterling," Joanna said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "But I have conditions." A flicker of what might have been surprise crossed his eyes. "Name them." "I want the best available neurologist to examine my grandmother Augusta immediately. Not after the wedding, immediately. Today, if possible. It will be done within the next 24 hours. I want her to live with me where I can care for her. But I also want us to have privacy for my life, not to be monitored. The house Martha showed you is yours completely independent. You will have the keys and no one will enter without your permission." Joanna took a deep breath for the last condition, the one that mattered most to her soul. "And I want to study. I want to go to college for agronomy. I want to truly learn about viticulture, about rural administration. I want to be able to understand this world, not just work in it." For the first time, something that could have been a smile lightly touched Anthony's lips. "UC Davis has an excellent agronomy program. You can take the entrance exams, or we can see about a special merit transfer. All costs will be covered, and you will have time to study. Your only commitment will be until the child is conceived." They looked at each other for a long moment, two strangers about to become husband and wife in the strangest way possible. "Then it's agreed," said Anthony. "The wedding will be next week, discreet with only the necessary witnesses. And Miss Garcia—" He paused, and there was genuine sadness in his eyes. "I'm sorry the circumstances are what they are. You deserved a real wedding with love and celebration." Joanna felt tears burn in her eyes, but didn't let them fall. "Life rarely gives us what we deserve, Mr. Sterling. It just gives us what it gives, and it's up to us to decide what to do with it." Anthony nodded slowly, respectfully. "One last thing," he added. "When we are alone, you can call me Anthony. Mr. Sterling is for the employees. You will be my wife, even if unconventionally." "Anthony." Joanna tested the name on her tongue. It sounded strange, too intimate, but also right in some way. And so on a March afternoon that smelled of ripe grapes and impossible decisions, a deal was sealed. There was no kiss, no ring yet, no promises of eternal love. Just two people trying to survive the cruel blows of fate in the only way they had left together, yet fundamentally alone in their reasons. The week leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind. Joanna could hardly process the speed at which her life was changing. Dr. Blake, the same oncologist treating Anthony, brought with him Dr. Simmons, a neurologist, specializing in Alzheimer's directly from San Francisco. Augusta was thoroughly examined in her own home. The doctor spent hours conducting tests, talking with Joanna about her history, observing the elderly woman. At the end, she sat with Joanna in the small living room. The condition is advanced, but there's much we can do to improve her quality of life. New medications, occupational therapies, regular follow-ups. We can't reverse Alzheimer's, but we can make the process smoother, less frightening for her. Joanna cried with relief for the first time in days. The few clothes she owned were packed. Anthony insisted she pick out a new wardrobe, but Joanna refused. After the wedding, I don't want anything before. Mrs. Davis was shocked when Joanna told her she was getting married. To whom child you weren't even dating? It's complicated, Mrs. Davis, but it's a good opportunity for me and Grandma. The neighbor hugged Joanna tightly. You were always a smart girl. I trust you. The wedding was set for a Thursday in early April. Joanna woke up early, took a long shower, and wore a simple beige dress she had found in a thrift store. There was no white dress, no veil, no illusions of romantic purity. It was just a beige dress that smelled of mothballs and uncertainty. The ceremony would be at the courthouse in Napa, followed by a quick blessing in a small chapel at Anthony's request, who, despite not being religious, wanted to respect family tradition. Martha came to pick her up. Augusta, having a relatively lucid day thanks to the new medications, came along. The elderly woman held her granddaughter's hand tightly. "Are you sure, my girl?" she whispered. "I'm sure, Grandma. I'm sure it's what needs to be done. Whether it's what I want, that's another story. But wanting doesn't always matter." The courthouse was an old building in the center of town. When they arrived, Anthony was already there wearing a dark suit that further accentuated his growing pallor. There were only 5 people waiting Anthony Martha, who would be a witness: Sebastian, the winery's general manager, a serious man with kind eyes, who would be the second witness, the lawyer, Mr. Campos, and the court clerk. There were no flowers, no music, no guests filling the waiting room, just the heavy silence of a ceremony that was more contract than celebration. Joanna walked toward Anthony with steps that echoed on the cold floor. Augusta had remained seated on the back benches, her hands clasped in silent prayer, even though she didn't know exactly why. When Joanna reached the counter, Anthony extended his hand to her. It was the first time they had touched. His hand was large, rough from work in the vineyards, but the touch was gentle, almost hesitant. The clerk began the ceremony in a bureaucratic voice, one that had performed this ritual thousands of times. He read articles from the Civil Code, matrimonial obligations, rights, and duties. The words sounded absurdly formal, cold legal. When it came to the "I do," Anthony answered with a firm voice, "I do." Joanna looked at the man who would be her husband, at the gray eyes that held so much sadness, and answered too. But her voice came out as a whisper. "I do." They signed the documents, the pens scratching on the paper, with sounds that seemed like screams in the silence. When it was over, the clerk declared them husband and wife, stamped the papers, and the ceremony ended in less than 15 minutes. There was no kiss, no hug, just a formal handshake, and the weight of the simple gold rings Anthony placed on her finger. The blessing in the chapel was even quicker. The elderly priest, a friend of the Sterling family, said a brief prayer, sprinkled holy water, and they walked back out into the unrelenting afternoon sun. Joanna was married. She was now Joanna Sterling, lady of one of the largest wineries in Napa Valley. And yet she felt exactly the same as the humble picker who had entered that courthouse an hour earlier. The move to the house on the estate happened the same day. Martha's team had already transferred Joanna's few belongings and set up Augusta's room on the ground floor, With an adjustable hospital bed, an adapted bathroom, and a comfortable armchair by the window from which the elderly woman could see the hydrangea garden. Augusta, confused by so many changes, held Joanna's arm tightly. "Where are we, child? This isn't our house." "It's our new house, Grandma. We're going to live here now. It will be good. You'll see." Joanna explored the house, slowly touching things as if they weren't real. The kitchen had a large refrigerator, a 6-burner stove, and cabinets full of dishes and utensils. The living room had a soft sofa, a huge television, and bookshelves. Her bedroom on the 2nd floor was spacious with a king-size bed covered in a white duvet, a walk-in closet, and a private bathroom with a bathtub. There was also a small office with a desk, a computer, and more bookshelves. On the desk, she found a handwritten note. "Joanna, these books are on viticulture, enology, and rural administration. I've started gathering material that might help you. Feel free to use this space. Anthony." Joanna sat in the office chair, looked out the window at the vineyards stretching to the horizon, and for the first time since making her decision, she allowed herself to take a deep breath. It was done. There was no turning back. Dinner would be served at 8, Martha informed her. Anthony dined in the main house, but had sent an invitation for Joanna to join him if she wished. "But there's no obligation," Martha clarified. "Mr. Anthony completely respects your privacy." Joanna decided to go. It would be strange to start a marriage, even an unconventional one, by completely avoiding her husband. She left Augusta in the care of Carmen, a nurse who had been hired to help with nighttime care, and walked along the illuminated path that connected her house to the main residence. The dining room was vast with a solid wood table that could easily seat 12 people, but only 2 places were set, one at each end. Anthony was already there, having changed from his suit into casual clothes, khakis, and a light linen shirt. "Joanna," he stood up as she entered. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you would." "We're married now," she said simply. "It would be strange never to see each other." They sat at opposite ends of the long table. A maid Joanna didn't know served the meal mushroom risotto steak with a red wine reduction sauce. Grilled vegetables food. Joanna had never eaten food she barely knew how to eat properly. Anthony noticed her discomfort. "You can eat however you like here. There are no strict etiquette rules. This is your home too." The dinner proceeded in uncomfortable silence. The cutlery made metallic sounds that seemed excessively loud. Joanna tried to discreetly imitate how Anthony used the different forks and knives, feeling out of place, an imposter in this world. "How is your grandmother?" Anthony finally asked. "Confused. But well, Dr. Simmons said the new medications will help a lot. Thank you for arranging everything so quickly." "It was part of the agreement." He paused. "Joanna, I want you to know that there's no rush for the other part of our agreement. You've just moved in. You need to adjust. We can wait as long as you need." Joanna looked at him surprised. She had expected him to want to fulfill that part immediately, given his limited time. "Thank you," she said quietly. After dinner, there was a moment of hesitation. Anthony walked her to the door, and they stood there, 2 strangers who were now married, not knowing how to say goodbye. "Good night, Joanna." "Good night, Anthony." And she returned to her house, crossing the garden under the stars, feeling simultaneously relieved and strangely disappointed. The first days as Mrs. Sterling passed in a haze of strangeness. Joanna would wake up in the spacious bedroom still expecting to see the cracked walls of the house in Calistoga, and it would take a few seconds to remember where she was. Reality would sink in slowly like cold water. She was married, living on a luxurious estate, the wife of a man she barely knew. Augusta was improving visibly with proper care. The nurse Carmen was patient and affectionate, and Dr. Simmons came 3 times a week. The mental confusion still existed, but the violent episodes had drastically decreased. Joanna didn't go back to the vineyards as a picker. Anthony had made it clear she didn't need to work, but idleness made her restless. She began to explore the estate, walking among the vines she knew from a completely different angle. Now, she wasn't the sweaty worker picking grapes, but the owner observing. One morning, she found Sebastian, the general manager, inspecting the irrigation system. He greeted her respectfully. "Mrs. Sterling?" The title sounded so strange. "Please call me Joanna. And can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Could you teach me how the winery's administration works? I want to really learn." Sebastian studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Mr. Anthony said you would ask that. He asked me to help you in any way needed. Come, I'll show you how we start the day." Thus began a new routine. Every morning, after making sure Augusta was well, Joanna would accompany Sebastian or the other managers. She learned about harvest schedules, pest control, soil analysis, fermentation, aging in barrels. Her mind, hungry for knowledge, absorbed everything eagerly. In the afternoons, she studied in her home office. Anthony, keeping his promise, had provided extensive educational materials. There were also application forms for the entrance exam to UC Davis. "The admissions process is in July," he explained at one dinner. "You have 3 months to prepare if you want to try." The dinners continued to be silent events. Joanna and Anthony met only on these occasions, sitting at that long table, exchanging basic information, but maintaining an emotional distance. He never pressured her, never mentioned the part of the agreement that was still unfulfilled. Until 3 weeks after the wedding, Anthony had a crisis. It was late at night when Martha knocked frantically on Joanna's door. Mrs. Sterling, it's Mr. Anthony. He's very ill." Joanna ran barefoot along the path to the main house. She found Anthony in his bathroom, vomiting blood, his face livid, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Dr. Blake was already there, administering an intravenous medication. "This is an expected complication," the doctor explained calmly, but his eyes said otherwise. "The cancer is advancing faster than we predicted." Anthony was taken to the hospital in Napa. He was admitted for 4 days. Joanna visited him every day, sitting by his bed, sometimes reading to him, when he was lucid enough to listen, other times just being there, a silent presence. On the 3rd day, Anthony took her hand. It was the 2nd time they had touched since the wedding. "Joanna, we need to talk about time." "Don't talk like that." "I have to. Dr. Blake was honest with me. I don't have 8 months. I have maybe 4, 5, if I'm lucky." His gray eyes studied her. "I would understand if you wanted to back out of the agreement. We haven't consummated the marriage. You could have it all annulled, take a generous financial compensation, and go on with your life." Joanna thought carefully before answering. In the past few weeks, something had changed inside her. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was genuine respect. Anthony treated her with dignity, invested in her education, and kept every promise. And there was something more, a mutual understanding between 2 people who had agreed to do the impossible. "I don't want to back out," she said. "I made a deal. I'm going to honor it." "Are you sure? Because after this, there's no turning back. There will be a child, a life that will depend on you." "I know." Joanna squeezed his hand. "I'm sure." Anthony closed his eyes, and she saw a single tear escape. "Thank you," he whispered. When Anthony was discharged and returned home, something definitive had changed between them. There were no more excuses, no more postponements. The clock was ticking, and they both knew it. The next night, Anthony knocked on the door of Joanna's house. It was the first time he had come there. She opened it, her heart pounding. He was in a dark robe, his face still pale from the hospital stay, but his eyes were determined. "May I come in?" he asked, and there was something almost shy in his voice. "Of course," Joanna nodded, stepping aside. They went up the stairs in silence, each step weighing like an irrevocable decision. What followed was mechanical, at first, two bodies fulfilling a contract, two strangers trying to create life without the spark that usually accompanies such an act. But there was also an unexpected gentleness in the way Anthony touched her, a respect that made it less cold than Joanna had feared. When it was over, he lightly kissed her forehead, just as he had at the courthouse. "Forgive me for putting you in this situation," he whispered. "You deserved so much more." Then he left, leaving Joanna alone in the darkness, feeling simultaneously changed and exactly the same. April turned into May. The vines entered their dormant phase after the harvest, and the winery prepared for winter. Joanna continued her learning routine now, with even more dedication. She studied for the entrance exam every afternoon, memorizing concepts in chemistry, biology, physics. Anthony, despite his deteriorating health, remained involved in the administration. He began to include Joanna in meetings with the managers, formally introducing her as his wife and future co-responsible party for the estate. "Mrs. Sterling will be making important decisions soon," he announced at a meeting with the entire administrative team. "She is studying viticulture and administration, and I expect everyone to treat her with the same respect you treat me." There was visible surprise, but also acceptance. Many already knew her as a dedicated picker, and seeing her now in a leadership position was unusual, but not absurd. Anthony's nightly visits became regular, though brief. He would come, they would do what needed to be done, and he would leave. There were no intimate conversations, no tenderness beyond the mechanical, but there was also no cruelty. Just two adults navigating a strange agreement with as much dignity as possible. Until one night, something different happened. Anthony arrived looking particularly tired. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling more than usual. "I'm sorry," he said. "I had a difficult day. The pain is worse." For the first time, Joanna took the initiative. She sat beside him, gently touching his face. "You don't have to do anything tonight. Just rest." He looked at her with surprise. "But time will pass anyway. Lie down." Anthony obeyed, lying on top of the duvet, fully dressed. Joanna lay down beside him, also on top of the covers, and they stayed like that, side by side, staring at the ceiling. "Can I ask you a question?" she whispered in the darkness. "You can. What was your first marriage like with Beatrice?" Anthony was quiet for so long that Joanna thought he wouldn't answer. "It was empty," he finally said. "Our families arranged it all when we were in our early 20s, a strategic union of properties. We lived together for 10 years, but we were never really married. We just coexisted politely." "Did you love her?" "No. And she didn't love me. I think that made it worse in a way. At least if there had been love that died, we would have had memories. But there was nothing. Just absence." Joanna turned on her side to look at him. "And now this marriage is arranged too." Anthony turned as well, their faces inches apart. "It's different. Maybe because we both went into it knowing exactly what it was. There are no illusions being broken. And because of you." He hesitated. "Because of me, what?" "Because you see me." Beatrice looked through me. "You see me as a person, not just a name or money or an obligation." Joanna felt something stir in her chest, something dangerous that shouldn't be there. "You see me too," she said quietly. "When everyone else saw an invisible picker, You saw more. They stayed like that for a long time, just looking at each other in the dim light. Then Anthony touched her face with trembling fingers. I'm starting to truly care about you, Joanna. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it is. I know, she whispered. Me too. And that night, for the first time, they truly made love. Not mechanical sex, fulfilling a contract, but something deeper, gentler, laden with an emotion neither of them expected to feel. Afterward, Anthony fell asleep in her arms, his breathing gentle for the first time in weeks. Joanna stayed awake, one hand on her own belly where life might already be growing, the other stroking his hair, and she allowed herself to feel what she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with her husband, and that made everything infinitely more painful, because time did not negotiate, and death was already knocking at the door. June arrived with an intense chill. The mornings dawned covered in frost, and the dormant vineyards looked like white ghosts under the ice. Joanna woke up on one of these mornings with a strange nausea, a dizziness that didn't come from illness, but from something deeper, more ancient. For 3 days, she ignored the signs, but when she couldn't eat breakfast for the 3rd time in a row, when the smell of the coffee she had always loved started to turn her stomach, when she felt her breasts were tender, and a fatigue that made her sleep in the afternoons, she knew. Dr. Simmons came on a cloudy afternoon, examined her discreetly while Augusta slept downstairs. Then, with a gentle smile, she confirmed, 7, maybe 8 weeks. You're pregnant, Joanna. Congratulations. Joanna asked to be alone when she told Anthony. She waited until dinner, when they were seated in their usual places at the table that had witnessed so many silences. The candles flickered between them, creating dancing shadows on the stone walls. Anthony, she said, and he looked up surprised. She rarely initiated conversation during meals. Dr. Simmons was here today. She saw how his body tensed, how his fingers tightened on his fork. In his gray eyes there was both hope and fear in equal measure. I'm expecting a child. For a moment, Anthony remained completely still. Then he dropped his fork with a metallic clatter, stood up unsteadily from his chair, and Joanna saw that he was crying. Not sobs, just silent tears streaming down a face that rarely showed emotion. She stood up too, not knowing exactly what to do, and walked over to him. Anthony pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her shoulder. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank God. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you. It was the first time Joanna had seen him completely vulnerable, stripped of the formality that always separated them. And in that moment, something definitively changed inside her. It wasn't just respect or compassion. It was a complicated, imperfect, but real love. We're going to create a life together, she said softly. Even if you're not here to see all of it, you'll be present in every choice I make. Anthony pulled away, holding her face between his trembling hands. I love you, Joanna. I know it wasn't supposed to happen. I know this started as a transaction, but I love you. You gave me hope when all I saw was darkness. Joanna felt her own tears fall. I love you too, in a strange, impossible, but true way. They kissed for the first time, for real. Not a mechanical or formal kiss, but one filled with everything they couldn't be, with all the futures they would never have. After that night, Anthony transformed. He became obsessively attentive, genuinely concerned with every detail of Joanna's well-being. He hired a nutritionist specializing in pregnancy. He made sure she rested properly, accompanied her on walks through the gardens, as if he feared she might disappear. One afternoon, as they walked among the lavender beds his mother had planted decades ago, he spoke about Beatrice for the first time without reservation. With her, It was like living with a polite shadow. We shared a house, meals, social obligations, but we never ever really knew each other. When she died, I felt only emptiness. Not sadness, not relief, just nothing. He stopped, turning to look Joanna in the eyes. But with you, Joanna, even knowing time is short, I feel alive. For the first time in my adult life, I wake up wanting to live the day. You gave me that. Joanna touched his face, feeling the lines marked by illness. You gave me more than you can imagine. You gave me an education, an opportunity. You made me believe I could be more than an invisible picker. You were always more. I just gave you the resources so the world could see what I already saw. The lessons continued, but now they had a different flavor. Anthony was literally teaching Joanna how to run an empire she would inherit not just in her child's name, but in her own right. He showed her the most complex contracts, explained the relationships with international distributors, introduced her to the bankers who financed their expansions. Sebastian is loyal and honest, he said of the manager. Trust him completely. Martha seems stern, but she has a heart of gold and knows every secret of this company. Rodrigo the enologist has the palate of a genius. Sylvia the accountant doesn't let a single penny go unaccounted for. These people are the heart of the winery, Joanna. Treat them well, and they will treat you well. Joanna absorbed everything, her hands often touching the belly that was beginning to subtly round. Inside her grew not only a child, but also a new version of herself. A woman who was learning to take up space, to have a voice, to believe her opinions mattered. One evening, while they were studying old documents in the main house office, Anthony suddenly took her hand across the table. There's something I need to say, he began, his voice hoarse. When I proposed this arrangement, I was only thinking of saving the winery, of stopping Raymond. But now, Joanna, this isn't just an agreement for me anymore. You've become the most important person in my life. Joanna looked at her fingers intertwined with his. What are you saying? I'm saying I've truly fallen in love with you, not as a husband by obligation, but as a man who admires who you are. Your quiet strength, your intelligence, your kindness that has remained intact despite everything life has thrown at you. Anthony, Joanna whispered, her voice failing. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. You've given me not just an heir, but also the best months of my entire life. Joanna stood up, walked around the desk, and sat carefully on his lap, mindful of his growing frailty. I love you too, and I'm going to miss you every single day for the rest of my life. They held each other, crying together, two people who started as strangers, united by desperation, and discovered that intimacy can be born not just from passion, but from respect, mutual admiration, and the simple act of truly seeing one another. July brought even colder days, and Anthony's health deteriorated drastically. The yellow of his skin deepened. He had lost so much weight that his clothes hung on him like rags, and the pain was constant, controlled only by increasing doses of morphine. But his mind remained sharp, and his determination to prepare Joanna was almost feverish. He knew time was running out. Joanna took the entrance exam for agronomy on a cold morning. Anthony insisted on accompanying her to the university gate, despite barely being able to stand. You're going to pass, he said with certainty, and you're going to be the best student in the class. And if I don't, then you'll try again, but you'll pass. She passed with a high enough score for a full scholarship. When the results came out in August, Anthony organized a discreet dinner to celebrate just the two of them. Sebastian, Martha, and Augusta, who was having a particularly lucid day. To the future agronomist, Anthony toasted, raising a glass of wine he barely touched to his lips. The chemotherapy made it impossible to appreciate the wine he so loved. That night, when they were alone, Anthony took Joanna to the main office and opened a safe built into the wall. From inside, he removed piles of carefully organized documents. These are the property titles, the main contracts, the agreements with suppliers. Everything is in order, everything registered. When I'm no longer here, this will be protected. You will be protected. Joanna held the papers, feeling their not just physical, but symbolic weight. I still feel inadequate. I was a picker 6 months ago. How am I going to manage all this? You underestimate yourself, Anthony said softly. In these months, I've seen how quickly you learn, how you ask intelligent questions, how the employees are already beginning to respect you. And most importantly, Joanna, you have something money can't buy: genuine kindness. This winery doesn't just need someone efficient, it needs someone with a heart. He gently touched her belly, where the pregnancy was now visible at 4 months. And even more importantly, you will raise our child with love. You will teach values that matter. That's worth more than any fortune. September arrived with the first signs of spring, but also with a dramatic worsening of Anthony's health. He could no longer work. He spent most of his time in bed, sedated by the pain. Blake came daily adjusting medications, doing what he could to maintain some quality of life. Joanna moved into the main house to be closer. Augusta, now stable with her treatments, stayed in the other house under Carmen's care, but Joanna visited her several times a day. The nights became different. Joanna slept in the armchair next to Anthony's bed, holding his hand, waking every time he groaned in pain. Sometimes in the moments of lucidity between morphine doses, they would talk. "Joanna," he said one of those nights, his voice weak, "I want you to be happy after I'm gone. I want you to love again if you find someone. Don't talk like that. I have to. Promise me you won't cling to my memory. You're 28, you have decades ahead of you. Our child needs you to be happy, not an eternally grieving widow." Joanna squeezed his hand. "I'll do the best I can. But for now, rest." One afternoon, Anthony asked Martha to bring a specific box from the safe. Inside were letters. Many letters, each one numbered and dated. "They're for our child," Anthony explained. "One for every birthday until he's 18, and one for you for after." Joanna held the letters as if they were the most precious things in the world. Because they were. "I don't want him to forget me," Anthony said, tears streaming down his face. "I don't want to be just a name on a tombstone. I want him to know who I was, why I did what I did." "He will know," Joanna promised. "I'll tell him everything, the good things and the difficult things. He will know the father who loved him before he even existed." October brought the first spring rains, and also the certainty that the end was near. Anthony no longer left his bed, his skin completely yellow, his eyes sunken, his breathing labored. Dr. Blake was honest. Days, maybe a week at most. Raymond finally appeared, trying to see his dying cousin. Joanna met him at the door, blocking the entrance. "He doesn't want visitors," she said coldly. "I'm family. I have a right." "You're a vulture waiting to devour what you didn't build. Get off this property or I'll call security." Raymond looked at her with hatred. "You're a gold digger who seduced a dying man. And you're a loser who has wasted every opportunity you've ever had. Now leave." When she returned to the room, Anthony was smiling faintly. "I heard everything. You're stronger than you think, Joanna. I learned from you." Joanna's belly was large now, 6 months pregnant. The baby kicked constantly, and Anthony loved to place his hand on her belly to feel the movements. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" he asked one afternoon. "I didn't want to know. Do you want me to find out?" "No, I prefer the surprise." He smiled. "But if it's a boy, I'd like to name him Michael. It was my grandfather's name, the man who founded this winery. And if it's a girl, Helen, my grandmother's name, who planted the first vines beside her husband." "Michael or Helen?" Joanna repeated, stroking her belly. Strong names with history. The last week of October was the hardest. Anthony drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for people Joanna didn't know, other times completely lucid for a few precious minutes. On one of those mornings, he woke up clearer than he had been in days. "Joanna, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let Raymond destroy what we've built. Fight for this land for these people. Be the leader I know you can be. I promise. And love our child for both of us. Teach him values that matter. Don't let money corrupt him. I promise all of it, Anthony. All of it." He pulled her closer, whispering in her ear, "You were the best gift life ever gave me. Even though it was late, even though it was for such a short time, you made me happy." Joanna buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing, "I love you so much too." That afternoon, as the sun set over the vineyards, painting everything gold, Anthony Sterling closed his eyes for the last time. He died peacefully, holding Joanna's hand with the sound of life beating inside her, a reminder that endings and beginnings always dance together. The funeral was 2 days later. Autumn covered the valley in wildflowers, and the sky was a clear, impossible blue. It seemed cruel that the world could be so beautiful when Joanna's heart was bleeding. The chapel of St. Michael was packed. Not just the workers from the Sterling estate came, but also owners of other wineries, distributors, sommeliers, specialized journalists, the entire wine community of Napa Valley. Anthony was respected not just for his success, but for his integrity. Joanna couldn't go to the cemetery. At 6 months pregnant and emotionally exhausted from the past weeks, Dr. Blake had strictly forbidden it. She watched from the window of her house with Augusta at her side, having one of her rare moments of total lucidity as the procession made its way up to the family cemetery on the hill. She saw the dark wooden casket being carried by Sebastian Rodrigo, the enologist, and other men from the winery. She saw the white flowers that covered the grave, saw the entire valley bid farewell to a good man. "He loved you, my girl," Augusta said, holding her granddaughter's hand. "I saw it in his eyes. And you loved him too." "I loved him so much, Grandma, and now he's gone and I don't even know how I'll go on without him." "You will go on, because you have a life growing inside you, because you promised him, because you are stronger than you imagine." That night alone in her room in the main house, which was now officially hers, Joanna opened the letter Anthony had left for her. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written in his last days, but every word was legible. "My dearest Joanna, if you are reading this, it means I have already left. I hope it was quick without too much suffering for you to watch. More than that, I hope our child is born healthy, and that you are well. I don't know how to thank you for what you gave me in these months. Not just the child, but true companionship, a love I didn't know. I could still feel hope when I only saw darkness. Take care of our child, Joanna. Teach them kindness above all else. Show them that the land is not just property, but a home for many families. Teach them about honest work, about justice, about using privilege to help others. And you, my beloved wife, do not bury your life along with mine. You are 28. You have decades ahead of you. Be happy. Love again if your heart allows it. Don't let this sad story be the end of your story. You turned a cold agreement into something warm and real. You saw me when I was invisible to myself. You gave me the best months of my entire life. Thank you for accepting my absurd proposal. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me, even knowing that time would be cruel. With all my love and eternal gratitude, Anthony." Joanna carefully folded the letter, placing it with the wedding ring they had taken from his finger, the watch he always wore, and a photo of the two of them taken by Martha on a rare day of simple happiness. Then she took her notebook, the same one where she had written since her days as a picker, and began to write, because Anthony had asked her to keep recording their story. "Today, we buried Anthony Sterling. And today, Michael, or Helen Sterling, at 6 months, still in my womb, has become the heir to an empire whose father they will never know, the father who wanted them so much. But I promise you, my child, you will know his story. You will know the man who was your father, not just through my words, but through the actions I will take managing these lands as he taught me. And I promise you too, Anthony, wherever you are, I will not waste everything you taught me. I will not let Raymond destroy your legacy. Our child will grow up strong, just, and kind. This I promise with every fiber of my being." The first few months without Anthony were the hardest. Joanna divided her time between grief, her advancing pregnancy, and managing the winery. Sebastian was her right-hand man, teaching her what Anthony hadn't had time to teach, translating theoretical lessons into practical daily decisions. "You have a natural knack for this, ma'am," the manager commented one afternoon, after Joanna diplomatically resolved a dispute between the sales department and the production team. Mr. Anthony chose very well, but not everything was easy. There was resistance. Some older employees questioned having such a young woman in charge. "How can we trust million-dollar decisions to someone who was picking grapes 6 months ago?" commented Peter, one of the oldest supervisors in a meeting. Joanna could have used her authority, could have fired him. Instead, she responded calmly. "You're right, Peter. I am young, and I've learned this business from the ground up. But that means I know every step of the process. I know the work of those in the field because I was there, and I'm willing to listen to those with more experience. So I'm listening to you now. If you have suggestions on how to improve things, I'd like to hear them." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Peter, surprised by her response, began to talk about a pruning method that could improve the quality of the grapes. Joanna listened, asked intelligent questions, and implemented the viable suggestions. From that day on, Peter became one of her most fervent supporters. Raymond, as Anthony had predicted, tried to contest the will. He showed up with expensive lawyers claiming the marriage was a fraud, that the pregnancy couldn't be proven to be Anthony's, that Joanna was a gold digger who had manipulated a sick man. The legal battle began in November. Joanna, at 8 months pregnant, had to sit before judges and answer invasive questions about her private life, about how she met Anthony, about the nature of their relationship. "Mrs. Sterling," Raymond's lawyer asked, his voice full of insinuation, "isn't it true that you were working as a seasonal picker, earning minimum wage, and suddenly you married one of the richest men in the region? Doesn't that seem convenient?" Joanna looked him directly in the eye. "Yes, I was a picker. I worked honestly to support my sick grandmother. Anthony offered me a deal marriage in exchange for security for my family and an heir to protect the winery. I accepted out of necessity, not greed. And over the months we fell in love for real. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty." Joanna's lawyer, Mr. Campos, was impeccable. He presented all the documents Anthony had meticulously prepared, medical records proving the pregnancy and date compatibility, witnesses who testified to the genuine relationship between them and the terms of the prenuptial agreement itself, which made it clear it was consensual and legal. "My client, Mr. Raymond Sterling," Mr. Campos argued, "has a documented history of gambling debts, bad investments, and financial irresponsibility. Meanwhile, Mrs. Joanna Sterling has studied viticulture, is enrolled in agronomy, and has demonstrated exceptional administrative ability in the months since her husband's death. who is truly fit to protect the legacy of the Sterling estate. The hearing was tense. Raymond looked at Joanna with pure hatred. "You're a fraud," he spat at her in the courthouse hallway. "A picker who tricked my cousin." "Your cousin chose me," Joanna replied calmly, her hand protectively on her enormous belly. "He chose me because he knew I would protect everything he loved. You only want to destroy it to pay your debts, and I won't let you." December arrived with intense heat and the imminent birth. Joanna was huge uncomfortable, but still insisted on working. She participated in meetings via video conference when she couldn't go in person. She reviewed documents, made decisions. "You need to rest," insisted Martha, who had become not just an assistant, but a genuine friend. "I'll rest after the baby is born, and after we win the case against Raymond." The verdict in the lawsuit came on a sweltering December afternoon. Joanna was in the office, her belly so large she could barely sit comfortably when Mr. Campos called. "We won," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "The judge dismissed all of Raymond's claims. Mr. Anthony's will is valid. The child is recognized as the legitimate heir, and you are confirmed as the administrator until the heir turns 21. Raymond was also admonished for bad faith litigation. Joanna hung up the phone and cried. Tears of relief, of victory, but also of sadness, because Anthony wasn't there to know his legacy was protected. That night, sitting on her porch, looking out at the moonlit vineyards, Joanna felt the first contractions. Labor began at 11 p.m. and lasted until the following dawn. Augusta, having an exceptionally lucid day, held Joanna's hand, wiped her sweat, and whispered words of encouragement, just as she had when Joanna was a frightened child. "A little more, my girl, a little more. You're strong. You always have been." Dr. Blake and a team of obstetricians worked efficiently. Dr. Simmons was also present not for medical necessity, but as emotional support. Dawn arrived with a rosy sky and singing birds. The contractions intensified, and Joanna entered that strange place where nothing else exists except the impossible task of bringing life into the world. "You're almost there," the doctor encouraged. "One more push, Joanna." And then, as the sun finally broke the horizon and filled the room with golden light, a loud, indignant cry filled the air. "It's a girl," Dr. Blake announced, smiling. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Helen Sterling was born at 6:37 a.m. on December 18th, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces with dark hair and clenched fists that punched the air as if she were already fighting the world. When they placed her in Joanna's arms, still messy and perfect, Joanna laughed and cried simultaneously. "Hello, little Helen," she whispered, touching the tiny reddish face. "Welcome. Your father has been waiting to meet you." Dr. Blake quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped her in blankets. "She's strong, this one. Excellent lungs." Joanna held Helen against her chest, feeling the tiny heart beat against hers. "You look like him," she whispered. "You have his nose, his forehead. Oh, Anthony, our daughter is here. Our Helen is here." Augusta, crying with joy, touched her great-granddaughter's cheek. "She's perfect, my little Joe, perfect." The first days with Helen were a mix of exhaustion and ecstasy. The baby was demanding. She wanted to nurse, constantly cried loudly when something wasn't to her liking. But when she slept, nestled against Joanna's chest, she was the most perfect thing that had ever existed. Joanna barely slept, but didn't care. She spent hours just looking at Helen, counting her tiny fingers, marveling at the way her eyebrows furrowed when she dreamed at the little yawns that were perfect copies of Anthony's. "Your father loved you before you even existed," Joanna would whisper to the sleeping baby. "He did all this for you, and I will tell you about him every day of your life. You will know him through the stories, through this land he loved, through the love he left behind." On the third day after the birth, Joanna asked Sebastian for help. She wrapped Helen in warm blankets, and together they went up the hill to the family cemetery. It was the first time Joanna had been there since the funeral. The grave was well tended with fresh flowers that someone, probably Martha, regularly placed. The simple headstone read, "Anthony Sterling, 1980-2024, beloved husband, father, guardian of these lands." Joanna knelt with difficulty, still sore from childbirth, holding Helen against her chest. "Anthony," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "Our daughter is here. Helen Sterling. She's beautiful, strong, and has your stubborn temperament." She took Helen's tiny hand and pressed it gently against the cold stone. "This is your daughter, and I promise you I will raise her as you dreamed. I will teach her about kindness, about justice, about loving the land and its people. I will read her the letters you left. I will make sure she knows you, even though you aren't here." Helen, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment, grew quiet, her dark little eyes trying to focus on the new vast world around her. Joanna stayed there for a long time, crying silently, allowing herself to feel the full pain of her loss, but also the full gratitude for having had, however briefly, a true love. When she came down the hill, the sun was high and warm. Helen was asleep against her chest, and Joanna looked out at the vineyards that were now hers, at the house that was her home, at the future she had to build. "Let's go home, little one," she whispered to her daughter. "We have a lot of work to do. We have an empire to protect and a legacy to honor. But first you need to eat, and I need a shower." And so, on a December morning that smelled of ripening grapes and new beginnings, a 28-year-old widow returned home with her newborn daughter in her arms, ready to face whatever came next. The cold agreement had transformed into true love. The time had been insufficient, but the legacy would remain alive in every decision Joanna would make, in every value she would teach Helen, in every grape harvested with respect and